Well, then at that point, in that case, we're going to start now. So, at this time, I call the Independent Investigation Committee to order, and I ask the clerk to call the roll.
Councilmember Evans.
Present.
Councilmember Patterson.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay. So for the community, we've got a little disclaimer to read. We're going to go through it verbatim, and other than breaks, you won't be hearing from myself or Councilmember Evans. So here we go. This is a public meeting of the Rochester City Council Prude Independent Investigation Committee, which consists of myself and Councilmember Malik Evans. This committee meeting is convened as part of the independent investigation being conducted by the law firm Emery, Shelley, Brickenhoff, Abaday, Ward, and Mazzell into the City of Rochester's communications, processes, and procedures that took place related to the death of Daniel Prude in police custody as authorized by Ordinance Number 2020-283. In light of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, this meeting is being conducted over video teleconference with real-time live stream access available to the public over the internet. Today's committee meeting is convened for the purpose of taking the deposition of former Chief La'Ron Singletary as part of the independent investigation. This deposition is being taken in a public forum solely at the insistence of former Chief Singletary and his counsel. All other depositions taken as part of the independent investigation have been conducted in a non-public forum. Because this is a deposition, there will be no opening or closing statements by anyone participating. The purpose of the meeting is solely to ask questions and obtain sworn responses in furtherance of the independent investigation. This is not a court proceeding, and the rules of evidence do not apply. The special counsel investigator, Mr. Shelley, and his team are expected to confine themselves in their questions to matters relevant to the investigation in the broadest sense possible and consistent with the implementing legislation, and, for purpose of this deposition, we defer to the special counsel investigator's judgment on precisely what that entails. The committee will not act as a court. We will not entertain or resolve objections or conflicts that may arise during this deposition. We expect the witness to listen to the questions posed by the independent investigator and respond truthfully and accurately. Mr. Talon and Mr. Getz are here as counsel to the witness, and they are free to consult with Mr. Singletary as such, provided they do so when no question is pending. Mr. Cohen is here as counsel to the Ms. Cohen is here as counsel to the City of Rochester. With one exception, all objections to any question by counsel are deemed preserved without need of an oral interruption. Accordingly, we do not expect to hear and will not permit counsel for the witness to state objections aloud on the record or to provide commentary during the testimony. The exception is for objections based on the attorney-client privilege, which may be stated aloud, along with a direction by counsel not to answer on the basis of privilege. We will not resolve or rule on those objections. They will simply be preserved for the record. Most importantly, today's deposition is part of an independent investigation. That is the command of the council as set forth in local law, and that is how we will conduct today's meeting. In order to preserve the independence of the investigation as required by Ordinance Number 2020-28, Council members Evans and I will participate only by listening to and observing the deposition, not asking questions, suggesting questions to council, or offering comments or opinions. Neither I nor Councilmember Evans have been briefed on the facts or the substance of the independent investigation as developed to date, including the precise topics to be addressed in today's deposition. We do not know what questions will be asked of the witness, and we have not been provided in advance any of the exhibits that will be used. All of this will be revealed to us in real time as it is to the public. Neither Councilmember Evans nor I have participated in any of the other depositions that have been conducted as part of this independent investigation. We will periodically adjourn this meeting for short breaks and for a longer break for lunch. I will now direct independent investigator Mr. Selly to commence the deposition.
Thank you, Councilmember Patterson and Councilmember Evans, and good morning, Chief Singletary.
Morning, Mr. Shelley.
We haven't met formally, but I'm Andrew Shelley, and I think you know that I and my law firm are special investigative counsel to the City Council of Rochester for the Prude matter. Today we're going to be taking your deposition, as you know, and I know you're here with counsel. That's Mr. Talon and Mr. Getz. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Greetings, counsel. Sir, I know you were a police officer for many, many years, and I'm sure you have experience testifying in court. Have you ever testified in a deposition
Kelly,
before?
I haven't sworn the witness.
Fair enough. Let's do that. That's important.
Chief Singletary, could you raise your right hand, please, sir? You don't have to stand, but do you swear the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chief Singletary. I should say, as I have said to other witnesses and counsel in this proceeding, this is not an adversarial proceeding. This is a fact-finding proceeding. So I'm just simply going to be asking questions and asking you to respond as best you can. Have you ever given a testimony in the context of a deposition as distinct from an appearance in court?
I have not.
Okay. So just so you have the basic ground rules, today I'm going to be asking you a series of questions. I would ask you to listen carefully to my questions and provide as full, truthful, and accurate as a response as you can. Is that okay?
Yes.
We are here with our stenographer. She's going to take everything down, so it's important that you provide verbal answers to my questions. Nods of the head or shakes of the head, shrugs, that kind of thing doesn't get picked up by our stenographer, so I'd ask that you respond verbally, okay?
Yes.
Okay. Sir, if at any time I ask you a question that you don't understand, I would just ask you to tell me I don't understand the question, and I'll do my best to rephrase or ask a different question. Is that okay?
Yes.
All right. And if at any time you would like to take a break, consult with your counsel, that's perfectly fine. Just say the word. I would simply ask that you not consult with counsel after I've asked a question and before you've tried to give your best answer if you understand the question. All right?
Yes.
Okay. Sir, have you done anything? One last question. Is there any reason that you're aware of that you believe you can't give truthful and accurate testimony today?
No.
Okay. Have you done anything, Chief Singletary, to prepare for today's testimony?
Yes.
And what have you done? And I'm asking not for any details of conversations you may have had with counsel, but if you spoke with counsel, just tell me that. And if you've spoken with anybody else or reviewed any materials, just tell me that, okay?
Yes. I've spoken with counsel. I've reviewed exhibits as well as documents that was provided.
Okay. And when you say you reviewed exhibits, you're referring to pre-marked exhibits that my office sent over to your attorneys. Is that right?
That is correct.
Other than those exhibits, what other documents did you review?
That's pretty much it that I reviewed for this documents with regard to the notice of claim as well.
Okay. Did you speak to anyone other than counsel about the fact that you're going to give testimony today or the substance of your testimony today?
No.
All right. Now, Chief Singletary, you are aware that on March 23rd, 2020, officers of the Rochester Police Department had an encounter with a person named Daniel Prude. Is that right?
That is correct.
And when did you first become aware of the fact that officers of the RPD had had that encounter?
Early that morning on the 23rd.
And do you remember the time of day?
Around 7:25, I believe.
Okay. And how were you informed of that information?
Deputy Chief Joe Morabito.
And did he call you on the phone, or was it some other form of communication?
Called me on the phone.
And what was the substance of that conversation, as you recall it?
Deputy Chief Morabito advised me that there was an incident that occurred on Jefferson Avenue where an individual was arrested, and that individual went unconscious after he was arrested. He told me the story about how the individual came to Rochester and how he was staying with relatives, and that there was a prior MHA and the individual was going to be under arrest for mental hygiene arrest. That's what I mean by MHA.
Thank you.
And also that the individual went unconscious during the arrest.
Mm-hmm. And was there anything else that you recall from that conversation with Chief Morabito?
Chief Morabito advised me that the condition of Mr. Prude was not good. He was still alive. He was at the hospital. He was in stable condition.
Okay. And based on that information, did you determine that you should contact the mayor of the city of Rochester, Lovely Warren, to inform her about what you had just learned?
Yes.
Was there any other information that was available to you when you made the decision to call Mayor Warren other than what Chief Morabito had told you?
No. Chief Morabito just explained to me that our officers had contact with Mr. Prude during the time that he went unconscious.
And when you say that Chief Morabito told you that your officers had had contact, am I to understand that Chief Morabito explained to you that RPD officers had had physical contact with Mr. Prude at the time he went unconscious? Did Chief Morabito say anything about Mr. Prude having ingested illegal drugs?
He told me that the individual was on PCP.
And based on that information, all of that information that you've just testified about, did you make a decision to contact the mayor? I did. And why did you decide to contact the mayor based on that information?
Based on the fact that Mr. Prude's condition was not good at that particular point in time, the prognosis was not good, and also the fact that our officers had contact with Mr. Prude. They were restraining him on the ground at that particular point in time. So we were going to treat this as an in-custody death incident from the very start.
Of course, as of 7:30 in the morning, Mr. Prude hadn't died yet. That didn't happen for about a week, right?
Correct.
Were you informed in that initial call that ambulance personnel believed that he had actually passed on the scene and then he'd been revived?
I was not informed that he had passed on the scene.
Okay. Now, I understand from sworn testimony that you've given in the context of your notice of claim against the city that you had two calls with Mayor Warren on March 23rd about the Prude matter. Is that right?
That is correct. One in the morning. There was also a conference call that we had at 1:30 p.m., which was a scheduled one-on-one conference where we called into a 428 number and provided an access code. Obviously, because of COVID, we were not meeting face-to-face.
Okay. So the second call was a previously scheduled sort of check-in, you would say, between you and the mayor?
That is correct.
And I'm going to ask some general questions about each of those calls, and then I'm going to go into a lot more detail about each of those calls, okay?
Yes.
As to the first call, what was your purpose in contacting the mayor at that point?
Just to give her an update as to what we were dealing with on Jefferson Avenue and Mr. Prude, and that I had preliminary information, very preliminary information, that I had not watched the body-worn camera video as of that moment. And that I would, once I watched the body-worn camera video and talked further with my command staff, that I would call her at sometime after I had watched the video, which was the 1:30 p.m. one-on-one.
Got it. And so this first call was at, did you say 8:30 in the morning?
It was sometime around there.
Okay. And as of the point that you had that call, did you have any written materials from your command staff or anybody in the department about the circumstances of Mr. Prude's mental health arrest?
I did not.
Okay. And I take it was just the two of you on that initial call?
Yes.
How long did that call last?
A couple of minutes.
And what do you recall the mayor saying on that call?
She said, okay, let me know once you watch the body-worn camera video. And there was a couple questions that were asked with regard to the incident.
Okay, well, what were the questions?
It was, from Chicago, and also the nature of Mr. Prude's conduct.
Okay. That she was asking you to describe his conduct, is that right?
Yes, and the officer's conduct as well. But I had not watched the body-worn camera video, so it was a preliminary assessment.
Okay. What did you tell her in that first call about the officer's conduct?
There's some background going on.
I don't have a dog, so it's not mine.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes. What did you tell Mayor Warren in the initial call about the officer's conduct at the scene?
That the officers had, with the initial call, that the officers had restrained Mr. Prude. I didn't have all the details with regard to the nature, but I knew that the officers had restrained Mr. Prude, so I advised the mayor that the officers had physical contact with Mr. Prude at that particular point in time.
Okay. And what did you tell Mayor Warren in that first call, as best you can recall? And we'll go into some more detail about the conduct of Mr. Prude.
So what did I tell her about the conduct of Mr. Prude?
Yes. Yeah, I think you said she asked about that, right?
Yes. Initially, that Mr. Prude was compliant when the officers had taken him into custody, as well as at some point the officers went hands-on with Mr. Prude, and at some point he went unconscious.
In the initial call with the mayor that morning, did you mention the fact that Chief Morbido had told you that Mr. Prude had ingested PCP? Yes,
I believe that I told her that he was on PCP.
Okay. Now switching over to the second call for a minute, you say that took place around 1:30, and that was a regularly scheduled conference call between you and her, right?
That is correct.
By the way, in both of these calls, it was just the two of you on each call, right?
To my knowledge, the second call was just the two of us.
Okay. And when you made the second call, you had watched the body-worn camera footage of the incident, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And
I'm sorry, did you say that's correct? I didn't hear you.
Yes, that is correct.
And in the second call, did you rely on any written materials or written reports from your command staff or anybody else at the PD?
I did. I relied on, in my notice of claim, I have two documents that I had in front of me when I had briefed Mayor Warren on our conference call.
Great. I'm aware of those, and we'll come to those, but I appreciate that. And how long did the second call with the mayor last?
We were scheduled from 1:30 to 2:15, and we were on the phone for a good portion of 45 minutes, I would say. And we talked, the majority of the call was spent talking about Mr. Prude.
Okay. So you think it was probably more than 20 minutes of the 45 minutes that you devoted to the Prude matter? Okay. I want to go back to the first call and ask a couple of really specific questions, okay? Chief, when you spoke to the mayor in the first phone call, did you let her know that Mr. Prude was found outdoors, naked, on a cold winter night?
Yes.
And did you tell her on the first call that Mr. Prude had been making statements when he was approached by police?
Yes, I advised her that he was making irrational statements when the officers made contact with Mr. Prude.
Did you provide in that first call any details about the comments that Mr. Prude was making?
I don't believe I did, no.
Okay. Did you tell the mayor in that first call that Mr. Prude appeared to be, when encountered by police, somebody who was in a mental distress?
Yes.
And in that first initial call around 8:30 in the morning on the 23rd, did you explain to Mayor Warren that there were more than one police officer who had physical contact with Mr. Prude?
Yes, I believe I described it as officers.
I see. Did you provide the names of the officers who were involved? Okay. And in that initial call, did you tell the mayor that the officers of the RPD were having physical contact with Mr. Prude after he had been put in handcuffs?
I explained to her that at some point in time that there was contact with Mr. Prude. I can't remember if I told her that it was after he had been placed in handcuffs.
Were you aware when you called the mayor that morning that the officers had physical contact with Mr. Prude after he was already in handcuffs?
I don't remember.
Okay. Did you tell the mayor in that initial call that a spit sock had been placed over Mr. Prude's head at a time when he was already handcuffed?
Yes, I do remember Deputy Chief Morbido saying that they had placed a spit sock on Mr. Prude.
And you communicated that to the mayor?
Yes.
And just to be clear, you told her in that initial call that a spit sock had been put over Mr. Prude's head after he was already in handcuffs?
I don't remember if I mentioned that he was already handcuffed.
Okay. Did you in the initial call use the term stabilization or stabilization techniques to describe what the officers, the nature of the physical contact was between the officers and Mr. Prude?
First call, I don't believe I did. The second call, I did.
Okay. What does that term mean to you, Chief?
Stabilization.
Yes.
Holding someone on the ground, preventing their movement.
Okay. And in that initial call, did you use the term segment or segmenting technique when you described to the mayor the physical contact that officers had with Mr. Prude?
I did not use that term. The mayor and I often talked in regular terms, if you will. But I did not use the term segmenting in the first call, nor did I use it in the second call. The mayor and I talked in plain language because I knew she would not know what the term segmenting meant.
Well, what does the term segmenting mean to you?
Term segmenting was a new technique that was taught to the department, instructed to the department in January of that year. We had trainers who were being trained in it for a couple of months, and it was rolled out in an in-service earlier that in 2020. Segmenting to me was when the officers places someone's hands on the head and stabilizes the head.
So the officer places his or her hands on another person's head and applies pressure. Is that fair? Okay. In that initial call, did you say anything to the mayor about one of the officers applying a hypoglossal pressure point to Mr. Prude?
During the initial call?
Yes.
No, I just basically said that the officers had physical contact with Mr. Prude. I didn't go into detail into the second call. Okay.
And the second, we'll circle back to that, but just since we're talking about it, on the second call, did you mention the hypoglossal pressure point?
I mentioned that Officer Vaughn had the head of Mr. Prude, and it was pinned to the pavement.
Okay, so we'll come back and get some more detail on that. In the initial call, did you tell the mayor that you believed that the conduct of the officers, as far as you understood it at that point, was appropriate, professional, and by the book?
I don't think I made a determination at that point. I had not seen the video. I just told the mayor briefly what I was relayed from Deputy Chief Joe Morbido.
And in that first call, did the mayor ask for an opportunity herself to view the body-worn camera video?
She did not.
Okay. So in the initial call that you had with the mayor, did you mention that there would be a criminal investigation of Rochester police officers arising from this incident?
Not during the initial call, no.
That's something that came up in the second call?
Correct.
We'll come back to that. And in the initial call, did you say anything about the fact that there would be a professional standards section internal investigation of the officer's conduct arising from this incident?
During the initial call, I did not.
That also came up in the second call?
That is correct.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your answer.
That is correct.
Is there anything about that first call that we haven't touched on that you think should be described in this testimony?
No, it was, like I said, a very preliminary call based on information that I had received from Deputy Chief Joe Morbido, and I explained to her that I would watch the body-worn camera and provide additional information once I had done so.
Okay. So the second call that day was the previously scheduled 1:30 one-on-one between you and the mayor. Tell us as best you can what you told the mayor on that call.
I had the two documents in front of me that you are familiar with. That one was a summary. It was an email from the Deputy Chief Joe Morbido that I had asked him to provide me with additional information so that I can brief the mayor. One was a document, and that's part of the notice of claim. And it's an email from the major crimes captain. And it's also an email from the lieutenant who was on scene that night and in charge of Genesee Section, 1st Platoon, where this incident occurred. So I had these two documents in front of me, and on the documents, I have highlighted specific information. We went through the whole entire document, and I provided the mayor with this information that's on the document.
Let me stop you there, Chief, if I can, and because I actually want to put up, Catherine, if you could post for us exhibit number 6, and we'll screen share that so that council and others watching can see what we're talking about.
Mr. Celli, is this being marked at this time?
Yes, we're going to mark as exhibit 6 what's been previously marked with the Bates range Singletary 74 and 75. And it's a series of emails, and I'll direct the witness's attention to various aspects of it, okay? If you would, Catherine, go to the next page, first page of the exhibit. So, Chief Singletary, I have placed before you a series of emails. I think we should ignore the top email from Lieutenant Sweatman. You're not on that email, and really focus on Deputy Chief Morbido's email to you on Monday, March 23rd at 11:51. FYI, and then the email that follows below that. Do you see that?
See the email that follows below.
In other words, Captain Umbrino's email to Chief Morbido at 7:27.
Yes, I do see that. On my document and my notice claim, I have it highlighted just for reference.
If you prefer to look at it in those terms, why don't we go, Catherine, to Exhibit 50. So it's the second to last page of the exhibit. We're going to mark as Exhibit 50 a document bearing the Bates numbers. Actually, we didn't Bates stamp this. This is Mr. Singletary's notice of claim with attachments, which I want to say is dated December 3rd. And we're going to the second to last page, Catherine. Maybe it's right. Exhibit D. I'm sorry. Exhibit D of this notice of claim. There you go. Nope, you just had it. Right. Next one. Next page. Okay. So Chief Singletary, I'm showing you what has been marked as Exhibit D to your notice of claim, which is the Monday, March 23rd, 2020 email from Deputy Chief Morbido to you and others regarding Jefferson Avenue incident. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And the first question I have for you is, you mentioned the highlighting on this document. Is that highlighting that you included with a highlight pen, or how did that get there?
Yes. That's highlight that I included with a highlight pen in preparation to brief the mayor. I wanted to be sure that I notated certain points within the document that I really wanted to express to the mayor.
Okay. And is it your testimony that, are you telling us that the things that you highlighted are things that you told the mayor in that call at 1:30 on the 23rd?
Yes. I went over the entire document with the mayor, as well as specifically to note to myself to ensure the things that I would advise the mayor on.
Okay. So I want to focus on a couple of specific things. I'm going to set aside the issue of highlighting or not highlighting and just ask some specific questions from this document, okay? About halfway down in Captain Umbrino's message, he writes, "Sure enough, they found the victim completely naked in the street." Do you see that?
Yes.
And the victim being referred to there is Mr. Prude, right?
Correct.
That's the term that Captain Umbrino uses?
Correct.
Okay. And in the second call, did you describe to the mayor that Mr. Prude had been found completely naked in the street that morning?
Yes.
Okay. And the next line, he says, he was ordered to the ground and complied without resistance or force and was handcuffed. Do you see that?
I do.
Did you communicate that to the mayor in your call at 1:30 on the 23rd?
Yes. I advised the mayor that Mr. Prude was initially taken into custody with no force, and that he was eventually placed on the ground. He was always already on the ground. He was on the ground and he was handcuffed.
Okay. And the next line that Captain Umbrino writes is, after a brief period of time, he began to try and get up. You see that?
Yes.
Did you explain to the mayor when you spoke to her on the 23rd that Mr. Prude was handcuffed and on the ground, and after a brief time, he began to try to get up?
I did explain that to the mayor, as I had already watched the video of such, and I did explain that to the mayor. And I explained that is when the officers went hands-on.
Incidentally, do you remember what time of day you watched the body-worn camera footage from this incident?
We had a 9 a.m. command staff meeting that morning, and it was sometime after that. I think the meeting may have lasted approximately an hour. Typically, they last an hour. So it was right around somewhere between 10 o'clock-ish at some point.
And you watched that with members of your command staff, right?
That is correct. I believe Lieutenant Shaw and I watched the video, yes. And other members of the command staff did watch it as well.
Who was present when you watched the body-worn camera footage?
Lieutenant Shaw.
Oh, just the two of you?
Correct. We were by his cubicle. We watched it.
I see. I thought you said a second ago that other members of the command staff were present as well.
Other members of the command staff were directed to watch the video.
I see. But they didn't watch it with you. They watched it at another time? Sorry, I missed that, Chief.
Yes.
Who were the other members of the command staff who you asked to watch the body-worn camera footage?
It was the three deputy chiefs: Deputy Chief Commander Morabito, Deputy Chief Mira, Deputy Chief Mira, Morabito, and Simmons, Commanders Rivera, Correa, as well as Commander Faber. And
why did you ask your command staff to view the body-worn camera footage from the Prude mental health arrest?
This was a very serious incident that had occurred that morning. So we wanted to make sure, as we typically do, we watched the review of the video of the body-worn camera to see, what occurred, if there was any, violations of policy or procedure, and things of that nature.
Okay. And prior to your second call with the mayor that day, did you consult with any members of your command staff about what they and you concluded by viewing the body-worn camera footage?
We had watched the video.
I'm sorry, could you start again?
We had watched the body-worn camera video. And yeah, there were discussions that were had, throughout that day, throughout that week, about the video.
Well, let's just confine it to discussions that you had with command staff that day before you communicated with the mayor. What do you recall about that?
We talked about that we were going to have an internal investigation, criminal review, as we knew that Mr. Prude's prognosis was not good at that particular point in time, but we knew he was stable. We watched the video, myself and Lieutenant Shaw, and we, basically talked about it, saw some of the actions of the officers. And again, I didn't make a determination at that particular point in time whether the officers were, justified or not in their actions.
Did any member of your command staff express to you that they had a view one way or the other, whether the conduct of the officers was appropriate and professional, having viewed the body-worn camera footage?
Repeat the question.
Yeah, prior to you speaking to the mayor that afternoon, had any other, you said that you yourself had not reached a conclusion about whether the officers had behaved appropriately. Is that fair?
Correct, because we were doing investigations. We were going to be ordering investigations.
Right. By the way, when you viewed the body-worn camera footage yourself, did you view it from the perspective of one officer's footage or multiple officers' footage?
So there was a couple videos that were, I think, downloaded already in there. I think it was officers Santiago and Vaughn's.
Okay. And having viewed those, the body-worn camera footage from those two officers, your testimony is you had not reached a conclusion in your own mind as to whether, in general, the officers had behaved appropriately in their restraint of Mr. Prude. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. And my question is, to go back half a step, did any other members of the command staff communicate to you whether they had reached a conclusion, having viewed body-worn camera footage from the incident, about whether they believed that the officers had behaved appropriately or not?
No, by looking at the preliminary assessment of the video, what we were doing was seeing was there anything of a criminal nature that we can judge from the video at that particular point in time. Whether anybody needed to be placed on administrative leave, suspended, those are some of the conversations that we had.
Okay. Did you conclude after you saw the video that you saw that day and before you spoke to the mayor the second time, did you conclude that nothing of a criminal nature had occurred in the incident?
Upon preliminary review, yes.
And by that I mean that no officer had engaged in criminal conduct based on your preliminary review at that point.
Based on the preliminary review at that point, the investigations were just ordered by myself.
Okay. And when you spoke to the mayor on that second call, did you communicate to her that your preliminary view was that the officers had not done anything criminal in their interaction with Mr. Prude?
I explained to her that there was, the officer stabilized Mr. Prude. I explained that the three officers' positions. I explained to her that Officer Vaughn held Mr. Prude's head down. Officer Talladay was on Mr. Prude's side and back area, as well as Officer Santiago held and stabilized Mr. Prude's feet during that time.
I appreciate that answer, and it saves me about 4 questions, but my question was a little bit different, which is, did you tell the mayor in that second call that you had concluded preliminarily that the officers had not done anything criminal in terms of their interaction with Mr. Prude?
Yes, I said it appeared that there was nothing egregious at that particular point in time. Again, that was a preliminary assessment. I explained to the mayor that we were going to be conducting investigations into such. But yes, I did not. I told the mayor that there was no strikes, there was no punches with regard to the video.
Okay. Tell me as best you can, if you can, recall the words that you used when you described to the mayor your conclusion that, as I think you just said, nothing egregious had happened and that there were no strikes.
I said just that. I said the officers held him down. There appeared to be no punches, no strikes. And I believe we talked a little bit about the Christopher Pate case during the second phone call. And I said it's not nothing like that. The officers just held Mr. Prude down to the point where he tried to get up at that point in time. Okay.
And the Christopher Pate case was a situation where a member of the force had engaged in excessive force against a civilian. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So let's go back to the email that you received from Chief Morbido at 11:51 on March 23rd. In Captain Umbrio's reporting in the 7:27 a.m. Document email that he sent, just reading along, he says, quote, Vaughn applied the segment technique to the victim's head. Tality had his knee on the victim's lower back, and Santiago held his feet. Do you see that sentence?
I do.
Okay. Did you tell the mayor that an officer, and whether you described him by his name or not, had applied a segment technique to the victim's head?
I did not. I said, what I explained to the mayor, again, me and the mayor talked in plain language because I knew she would not know what segmenting was. I said that Officer Vaughn stabilized Mr. Prude's head. He held his head down to the pavement.
Is segmenting a stabilization technique?
Is segmenting a stabilization technique?
Yeah.
Holding someone's head down to the ground. It's a different word, but I describe it to her as stabilization.
Okay. And did you describe to the mayor specifically that an officer held Mr. Prude's head to the ground after he was handcuffed and while he was wearing a spit sock?
Yes.
And did you tell her that the officer was holding Mr. Prude's head to the ground while he was wearing a spit sock, while he was in handcuffs, on a cold night for more than 2 minutes?
I don't know if we talked about the cold night, but I mean, I think we both knew what the night was like. It was the temperature.
Fair enough. I guess my focus really was about the amount of time. Did you communicate to the mayor the amount of time that an officer held Mr. Prude's head to the pavement?
I don't believe so.
Okay. And what, if anything, did you say? Strike that. Did you tell the mayor that an officer, perhaps identifying him as Officer Taladay, had placed his knee on Mr. Prude's lower back during the restraint?
Yes, I did.
What did you say about that?
I said that there was another officer, Officer Taladay, that had placed his knee along the back side of Mr. Prude while he was on the ground.
And did you characterize or explain to the mayor over what period of time the officer had his knee in Mr. Prude's back?
I did not, and nor did the mayor ask.
Fair enough. By the way, well, let's just go to Santiago and Captain Umbrino states that refers to Officer Santiago holding Mr. Prude's feet. Is that something that you told the mayor?
I did. I said that Officer Santiago was on the ground holding Mr. Prude's feet so that he couldn't move.
Okay. Did you tell the mayor the names of the 3 officers who had hands-on to Mr. Prude?
Yes.
So you mentioned Vaughn, Taladay, and Santiago. Is that correct?
I did.
Okay. Did those names have any reaction from the mayor, to your recollection? Did the mayor ask any questions about the conduct, as you described it, of Officer Vaughn?
No, not that I recall. I mean, we had a back and forth. I remember one of the themes of the conversation was about PCP and how it was kind of unfamiliar to Rochester, and the mayor saying that he must have brought that with him from, Chicago or where he came from, because it was a drug that was not familiar to Rochester. The mayor was kind of surprised that he was on PCP.
Okay. Did you tell the mayor that prior to going unconscious, Mr. Prude began to vomit?
Yes.
And did she ask any questions about that?
Yeah, I think she said, like she just asked clarifying questions with regard to, what do you mean he vomited? I said there was a clear liquid that came out of his mouth during that particular point in time when the officers were stabilizing him.
Got it. And did you tell the mayor that officers and medical personnel checked for a pulse on Mr. Prude after he became unconscious and could not find a pulse?
I know I said he was tended to by medical personnel, and that he was unconscious, and then they had regained a pulse and took him to the hospital.
Okay.
I'm sorry, and they had regained a pulse?
And took him to the hospital.
In Captain Umbrino's description, he has this line, AMR began CPR and called it a 500. You see that?
Yes.
What does that mean?
Medical 500 means they're working a potential fatal victim.
Okay.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again?
A potential fatal victim.
And then Captain Umbrino says, victim was ultimately revived. Did that communicate to you that Mr. Prude had passed away on the scene and was brought back and revived by medical personnel?
Well, I know he had lost conscious, and then he had been brought back. He was transported to the hospital.
Okay. And did you communicate, did you tell the mayor that Mr. Prude had been declared a medical 500, potentially a fatal, this was a potentially fatal incident, and that he was revived on the scene?
I wouldn't use the term medical 500 with the mayor. Again, as I stated, that her and I talked in plain language. I said that he went unconscious, and he was brought back and then taken to the hospital.
Okay. Let's Catherine, if you could help us, let's have a look at next page of the notice of claim. So it'll be Singletary, I guess that would be 306. It got a little obscured on this document. Chief Singletary, this is a document that you attached to your notice of claim. Is this also something that you used in your communications with the mayor on the 23rd?
I did. I had both of these documents in front of me.
And I noticed on the notice of claim, so let's focus on, I'm not sure of his rank, but Tordai, is that a lieutenant? Yes?
Yes.
Good guess by me. So Lieutenant Tordai sends a message to Deputy Chief Morabito and others, and that ultimately gets forwarded to you around noontime by Deputy Chief Morabito, right?
That is correct. After my request to have these incidents forwarded to me with additional information so that I can brief the mayor.
Okay. And here we also have yellow highlighting on this document. Is that highlighting that you applied, sir?
Yes, it is.
And what was the purpose of that highlighting?
To ensure that I hit certain points within the memo to advise the mayor.
Okay. And is it your testimony that you conveyed everything that is highlighted to the mayor?
Yes, in this document, I had both documents in front of me, and I wanted to ensure that there were certain things that I really hit with the mayor, but the mayor, pretty much I went over the entire document with the mayor. I really wanted to make sure that I hit certain points, underlined, highlighted, as I was going through the document with the mayor.
So let me ask about a couple of things that are highlighted on Lieutenant Tordai's email from the 23rd. Did you tell Mayor Warren that a tow truck driver employed by Gates Towing saw Mr. Prude running southbound on Jefferson Avenue?
So told her that he had encountered a tow truck driver on Jefferson Avenue.
Okay. So where the document refers to the driver having been employed by Gates Towing, that's not something that detail is not something that you communicated to the mayor. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Okay. And you also highlighted that Mr. Prude had, quote, just arrived from Chicago, took some PCP. Do you see that?
Yes.
What did you say about PCP?
I stated that this individual, based on officers' observations and reports that they had received from family members, that this individual was likely high on PCP.
Did you tell Mayor Warren that what you were led to believe by this memo is that the PCP had been taken and that Mr. Prude had been taken to the hospital after that and then released from the hospital subsequent to that and prior to his arrest?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. I'm just focusing on Lieutenant Tordai's memo. He writes, just arrived from Chicago, took some PCP, and then he goes on, as a result, he became suicidal, made statements that he wanted to die, and wished someone would just kill him. He was MHA'd on 3/22, March 22nd, about 1900 hours. He was released a few hours later and returned to 50 Child Street. And what I take from that is that Lieutenant Tordai is saying that Mr. Prude had taken PCP at some earlier point on the 22nd, gone to the hospital, and been released. Is that fair?
That is correct. That is the first encounter that RPD officers may have had with Mr. Prude.
Okay. And my question is, did you tell the mayor that the PCP that was described had been taken on the 22nd, not on the 23rd, that the gentleman had been taken to the hospital and then released from the hospital?
I think we talked about just about an overall PCP was had based on the actions of the officers that night on the 23rd. As the 22nd,